be the change you want to see. Reckoning Inc. is doing that and sharing that information with us. I am glad that they are here and letting us know exactly what's going on. Dan Getteman is here, Executive Director, Reckoning Inc., and Denise Payton also joining us, Kentucky U.S. Colored Troops Project Director and also part of Reckoning Inc. So this is so wonderful to see. It's amazing to me, though, that we're seeing a lot of this. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this. We did a story yesterday where we saw over in Indiana that they're taking the books of slaves and different census things, and the books are beginning to wear thin and tear up. So now they're digitally recording them so they don't lose that information. We have the, I don't want to say it wrong, Hannah Drake is doing the Unknown Project. The Unknown Project, and we see, and I just look around and go, why did we wait so long? Why did, I mean, and maybe there's no answer, maybe I shouldn't ask that question, but I just go, why did we wait so long?
Well, I think, Dawn, that Kentucky, I won't say uniquely, but in particular, has kind of forgotten or ignored large parts of its history as it relates to race, as it relates to slavery, as it relates to Jim Crow. It hasn't been well passed down in oral history in families, either black families or white families. We were just talking to some over lunch about somebody who was like, oh, well, there was no slavery in our family. Well, sure enough, there was. It was just not something that was talked about, right? So institutions forgot about the fact that they had paperwork languishing in their archives or in their library. Families kind of forgot that they had papers related to slavery. So all this history is hiding in plain sight in the state of Kentucky, but just sort of ignored or forgotten about. And the whole purpose of our organization, Reckoning Inc., is to rejuvenate, to uncover that history and to show it to the public, whether it's adults, whether it's children in schools. We've got curricula for K through 12 elementary, middle, and high school educators about the history of slavery in Kentucky, and in particular about the legacy of African American Civil War soldiers from Kentucky, which is the thing that in particular we're working on right now. But it's a peculiar thing. There's a professor at University of Kentucky, Vanessa Holden, and she came here from Virginia. I did an interview with her for this podcast series we did called The Reckoning.
And we're connected to Virginia a lot.
Yes.
Like an awful lot, and I always go, why? My family and slavery. I have a book that's like that big, and I've not had time. I had some people research and go back because we can't find our history. We were sold off like crazy, and you can't find your history. But I can't understand why we're so connected to Virginia.
Well, we were part of Virginia. So Kentucky was effectively the westernmost part of Virginia back in colonial times. So, and then where the 14th state cut off from the western part of Virginia and turned into its own state. So it makes sense that we've got this lineage, and also just because of the way geography works, there were a lot of people who crossed the mountains and settled in Kentucky, which was south of the river, right? So this was the natural place to go if you were going to head out to the western frontier. And in particular, take your slaves with you. Or in some cases, they sent their enslaved people ahead of time to cut down the trees and, till the fields and make it ready, or sometimes even build the log cabin for those Virginia families who were coming to Kentucky.
But here in Kentucky, I mean, certainly a slave state, I think of the Civil War, Kentucky had to be like, if not the most important state when it comes to fighting the Civil War. We were pivotal.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We were pivotal. Abraham Lincoln knew, okay, we got to take care of Kentucky or everything is going to be lost.
That's right.
Can we talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, so Kentucky was this incredibly important state strategically, and Louisville in particular, and it all had to do with transportation routes. So
Because we
of
had that
shipping.
that river. Matter of fact,
and railroads.
And railroads.
North-South railroads.
And when you said the term, "You can sell me down the river,"
yes,
came from Kentucky.
This river.
Right.
Because if you got sold down the river, you were going down south, and that meant your life was going to be hard and you were going to die. Don't sell me down south.
Right.
And we didn't really need slaves here. We didn't have heavy cotton picking, but we could sell them and make money.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that we've learned from doing the research of the reckoning is that slavery was integral in every single aspect of the economy of Kentucky. So right here, where we are in Louisville, if you go back and look at the census in, let's say, 1860, okay, and you look at, there was a part of the census just keeping track of slaves. It's called a slave schedule. And if you look at it for downtown Louisville and you just go up and down Main and Market Street, virtually every business either owned slaves or they leased slaves from other slave owners and put them to work in their factories, in their stores, in their warehouses, whatever that business was, as longshoremen on the river, etc. So it's, even though we may not have had big plantations like they had in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, we had, first of all, just a widespread usage of enslaved people. The late Blaine Hudson from U of L.
Yes, loved.
He estimated that by 1860, roughly half of all white families in Kentucky either owned at least one slave or they leased at least one slave. And this whole notion of slave leasing is something that's been lost into history. But
I've never heard of it.
So in the same way that you could go to Rent-A-Center and rent a
okay,
bedroom
Dan, you're
suit.
gonna mess with my head now.
No, I'm really serious about
stop.
this. Or lease a car instead of rent a car. So in the same way, it was seen as upward mobility, because to at least have a cook or a chauffeur, right? So if you couldn't afford to have a cook or a chauffeur,
but you're talking about a person,
yes,
and
exactly right.
it was property.
Yes, but so you would pay an annual fee to the person who owned that person. So the actual enslaved person didn't get paid. It was the person who owned them that would get paid.
Yeah.
And this was an intrinsic part of the economy of Kentucky all the way through the 1850s and the 1860s. So there was, and it's free money. For the person who owned that person, all of the expenses involved with keeping that person alive were passed on to the leasee. So in other words,
food,
paying
clothing,
them, medical care, and it was actually written into the contract. You had to get them a new suit of clothes in the winter. You had to get them a coat. You had to take them to the doctor, etc., etc. You had to feed them in a certain way, like so many bushels of corn, etc. So
like a cow.
Like a cow.
All right. Well, I got to take a deep breath here. And every time I go to a game down at the Yum Center, that corner there, that was the corner where they sold slaves, and they put them up on a stand and checked their teeth and their skin and looked for bugs on their body. It just makes me crazy. We're going to come back more with the reckoning and what's going on facing the legacy of slavery in Kentucky. We'll be right back. Be the change you want to see. Reckoning Inc. is doing that. These are pictures of, well, my guests will tell me that. They are here. Dan Getteman is here, Executive Director, Reckoning Inc., and Denise Payton, Kentucky U.S. Colored Troops Project Director. What are we looking at? So
what you're looking at is an extraordinary picture. So these are the soldiers of the 108th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment. They were formed in Louisville in 1864, in the summer of 1864. And what you're seeing, that is a Confederate prisoner of war camp in Rock Island, Illinois. And these black soldiers were the guards for the Confederate prisoners of war.
Did they fight? Did black soldiers fight in the Civil War?
They did, absolutely. As a matter of fact, not this particular regiment. They hardly saw any action. However, there are other regiments from Louisville, such as the 107th and the 109th, the 125th, that saw serious action, and in particular at the siege of Petersboro and Richmond in Virginia. This was near the end of the Civil War. It was a bloodbath. It was sort of like I don't know, the Battle of the Bulge or something like that, or D-Day in terms of carnage. So
in Kentucky.
Well, these were soldiers from Louisville who ended up serving in Virginia. So there were plenty of soldiers from Kentucky who saw action. This particular group saw very little.
Well, there is at Roots 101, we fought for our freedom, Kentucky's African-American Civil War soldiers. Denise, tell us what you guys are going to be doing there and how the public can be part of it.
Well, we have an exhibit of the photographs of soldiers from the 108th, and there's actually going to be an opportunity for visitors to the museum to actually log into our live site, kyusct.org, to view details about the profiles that our researchers have developed for each of these soldiers and more, in fact.
So literally when you go to the museum, with your cell phone, there's a QR code underneath every one of the photographs that you're seeing.
It's amazing how that works.
And then Denise's team, we have about 25 staff members, volunteers, interns, and some paid staff that have been doing deep research into all these soldiers. And we've learned their parents' names and their children's names and their spouses' names and their siblings' names, what became of them after the war. And then we have family trees for all of them, bringing them down close to the present so that we know who the descendants of many of these soldiers are. And as a matter of fact, we are going to have some descendants. We're doing a reception tonight, and we've got some descendants tonight that are coming who are descendants of a soldier from Louisville who is also an ancestor of Muhammad Ali. So there's so many people who may not even know that they descend from these soldiers. And part of the whole point of our project is to help connect African Americans with their enslaved ancestors through military records that exist that help people answer this question, you know, who were my ancestors who were enslaved? Exactly who were they? What were their names?
But it's so hard because we were not allowed to learn to read unless we did it in secret. We were beaten for it. We were not allowed to write. We were beaten if they saw us writing. We were sold off. A mother was gone this way, a baby was gone this way. And so that history had to be given orally, and I've said this 8 billion times. My grandfather said the history, and I didn't record it, and I wish I did. Now I have some of it. Denise, how can we come and listen? Like, can we come tonight, or do we just go to Roots 101 and we can find out there? Because a lot of people want to trace their history.
Yeah, you can visit the museum and, as Dan said, use the QR code and actually access our live website and view profiles of soldiers. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is key elements of our research are the military records that we find on the United States colored troops. Those are records that would not have been created if they had not enlisted in the Army. Secondly, we have access to Freedmen's Bureau records and Freedmen's Bank records, which give us a window into the lives of the soldiers before the 1870 federal census, where you find most of the former enslaved individuals listed for the first time by name. So we're accessing some records that are bridging that gap, if you will, until the 1870 federal census.
This 1870 census we're talking about is such a huge deal for African Americans, because if you're trying to do your family tree and you're working backwards from now, you could go back a few generations and you just can't find any information of what happened to people who lived before that time in slavery. So what we're able to do is insert military records in the midst of that gives you a window into what was the name of those people that were enslaved. And then you can go and see who were their enslavers and then go find records associated with that enslaver, wills and estate settlements and other things where they actually mention the names of enslaved people and how they're related to one another.
I look at all of this and I just take a deep breath, and I don't even know what to feel about it.
Yeah.
And
so if I could just say, we have a website, reckoninginc.org, reckoninginc.org. You're looking at it right now, and there's all sorts of stuff on that website. We have a podcast series. We have oral histories of formerly enslaved Kentuckians, and we have access to all these Civil War records, genealogical information. It's chock full of information.
I thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you
so very much. You saw the website there. Check it out. And again, Roots 101, the museum, just wonderful. Follow them, visit them, and learn.